How's it going, everyone? Joey here, and I am joined by Rob of Rule of Two Review, and we're talking Metroid, a subject we are a little too knowledgeable on, don't you think so, Rob?
Oh, for sure. Lots of wasted space up here on the Metroid stuff.
Wasted space. Come on. It's not wasted.
Valuable space. It's valuable space.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're talking today because it is officially the 4-year anniversary of the delay of Metroid Prime 4. Here we are. We're not celebrating anniversaries of delays, but yeah, we're talking about them because that's how much we really want this game. Rob, I am so sad because I remember this game like being announced at E3 2017 and thinking, cool, maybe in 2 or 3 years, we'll play a new Metroid game. It's been almost 6. Just the mess of a development this game has had has just put a bit of sadness in my heart. Even though we've had Metroid Dread come out since then. Let's talk a little bit about Metroid Dread, though. What a fantastic game.
An amazing game. It was fulfilling like a 20-year promise, right? Like Metroid Fusion was 2004. And it took almost 19 years for them to make a sequel. And it's the kind of game that was so surprising because I think we all learned that not everyone knew that Metroid Dread was a game that was supposed to come out like 10 or 15 years prior. There was all these rumors and IGN articles and stuff back in like the late 2000s. I want to say 2006 or 7 about this Metroid Dread sequel to Fusion, and it was exciting. And then that thing just died and disappeared. They teased it in Metroid Prime 3, very famous tease, which was kind of exciting, but nothing ever came of it. And so to finally get that game while we were still waiting to see what was happening with Metroid Prime 4 was exciting, and I think it made us feel a little bit better about Metroid while we wait for Prime 4.
Oh yeah, it was a total delight, Metroid Dread was like the first original 2D Metroid sequel to Fusion coming out in 19 years. I mean, myself, I would consider that an appetizer to Metroid Prime 4, but for a lot of people, that was the main frickin' course. Were you in that camp, Rob, where it was like a main course to you? Or do you also consider it kind of an appetizer for what's to come in the Metroid universe with Metroid Prime 4?
That is a great question, and it's kind of a tricky question. I think for me, I'm going to mostly say it was a main course because, really those numbered 2D games are the main story and the main bread and butter of what Metroid is. It was built on the foundation of those 2D games, right? Metroid on the NES and Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo were just such huge deals at their respective releases. For me, Metroid Prime, the first game, is also my favorite Metroid game. I think it's yours too. I believe we've talked about that many times in the past.
Oh, yes.
And so I kind of rest in this weird gray space where my favorite Metroid game is the first-person Metroid Prime game, but I also think that Metroid as a series kind of shines in 2D, and by definition, the 2D games are the main thread, right? As we know. And so for me, it was like, okay, Metroid 5 is the main course game. It truly is, and I was so excited for a brand new 2D game. I loved Samus Returns, but like you said, it was a remake. So I was so excited for a main Metroid 5 game. But at the same time, I'm so much more excited for Prime 4 because it's a sequel in the series of my favorite game, Metroid Prime, that I kind of also saw it as an appetizer in a weird roundabout way, right? So that's kind of where I fall. I don't know what you think, but that's kind of where I am.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I was introduced to Metroid through the Prime series. I just randomly one day said, "Hey, that Metroid Prime 2 game at Target here looks good. I'll check it out." I know I played the sequel before I played the first game, but it was still just a great experience all around, and I didn't really play or finish rather the 2D games until much, much later after that. So yeah, in that way, Dread was more of an appetizer to me for what's to come with Metroid Prime 4. Rob, are we finally going to see it this year? I should clarify, maybe not see and released, but more so see in finally a gameplay trailer of some sorts. And I know we say this almost every year. We had a discussion too with Super Metal Dave 2 years back on this day we're on today. And because we talked about that too, will we see Metroid Prime 4 this year? We were wrong, but I don't think we were upset because that's when Dread came out, right? But is this the year, Rob? Is it the year?
I mean, it's the eternal question, man. And I'm trying to not be the guy that says every year is the year and then every year isn't the year, and so we wait. But I guess I am gonna be that guy because I do think that there's a great chance we see it. time has taught us that anything is possible and nothing is for sure. So to me, I would be willing to say there's like a 60-70% chance that we could and should probably see it this year. E3, we don't know if Nintendo's going to do an E3, but right now E3 is a scheduled thing. So if Nintendo does something for E3, it's going to happen after Zelda Tears of the Kingdom comes out, which I think is an important thing for us to think about. So their biggest game of the year, Zelda, will already be released. And so if they do an E3 Direct, it's a great time for them to show some of their biggest future projects and have like one major megaton drop. And I think there's a couple of games that could be that, like a new Mario or a new Mario Kart. But if they don't do those, the first footage or trailer of Metroid Prime 4, I actually think would be that, provided it's not overshadowed by something like a new Mario game. And if they don't do that, we usually get a Direct in September at the end of the year, right? So I could either see it at E3 or I could see it being in September. But I'm not a deadlock on either of those because, there's a whole other kind of convoluted concept that could play into this, which is there next-gen hardware at play with Metroid Prime 4? I think you and I have some similar, mostly, feelings about that, and there's that kind of throws a wrench into everything. And if there's supposed to be next-gen hardware, does that maybe push back the release of the game, and then does that push back the reveal of the game? So, long story, not at all short. I'm kind of in like the 70-30 in favor of seeing it this year, but that 30% of not seeing it is a pretty big 30%.
Yeah, I feel like it's way more possible this year than it was last year. If anyone on the internet wants to prove me wrong, I feel like I said last year like we wouldn't see Prime 4 because I don't feel like they would want to show something right after Dread, maybe. If anything, I think I bet on the remaster or remasters of the Prime trilogy, whatever the rumor is. I think I was betting more on that being a thing last year in 2022. But now we're in 2023. I would hope that we get something this year because now that we're in the 4 years of knowing that that Retro Studios has been working on this, we still don't know for sure like how long they've had this project in their hands. It could have. I would imagine it was fairly recently, like before that development update where Shinya Takahashi that confirmation, where Takahashi just looked at us with like saying, "I don't got the best news for y'all."
Yeah. Sorry, folks. Bad news today. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, I feel like this could be the year. And I want to say I'm more confident that it is going to be this year we see something released. I'm not sure, but before we get into like more of when it would be released, I do want to talk about the possibility, of course, going back to those heavily rumored every single year since 2017 Metroid Prime trilogy coming to Switch, or now it was recently been rumored that it's just the first game that's been heavily remastered, remade, whatever that means. It seems like if we were to get those things announced soon, you would think they'd probably want to bundle it in with a little bit of a Metroid Prime 4 sort of tease there, if anything, but I feel like these have to happen. You just came out with a video on it, Rob. Do we need it? Do we need it?
Okay, so here's the thing. I did come out with a video just the day that we're recording this about this exact topic. So, do we need it as fans? I think the answer is probably yes. Now, the thesis statement of my video was whether or not Nintendo, I think, needs to put the Metroid Prime trilogy or a remake of the first or whatever on the Switch before Prime 4 comes out. And I really settled on no, I don't think they need to do it, just because I don't think that the Prime games play out in such a way as far as like the story and the narrative that it's mandatory to play Metroid Primes 1, 2, and 3 before playing 4. And I also hope that 4 is made in such a really high quality way that it'll be a benefit to play the first games, but it won't be mandatory, and they might feed you the story or give us a recap in such a way. I drew a comparison to Metroid Dread. It's Metroid 5. The sequel was 20 years, or the prequel was 20 years earlier. But most people didn't play those older games, and they just certainly didn't re-release them on the Switch before Metroid Dread came out. They gave us a recap. They had a ton of marketing. They were doing the Dread reports, and they helped new players get caught up to speed. And I remember their messaging was very vocally, you can start your Metroid adventure with Metroid Dread. They kind of designed that game, right, because of the success of the Switch to do that. And so I want to hope that with Metroid Prime 4, if they do the same thing, then you can technically get away with not releasing the trilogy on the Switch beforehand. And new players and old fans like you and me can jump in and just be fine. But I'll end this by reiterating the point I also made in my video. I still want them to do it. I know we all want them. I think the fans need it to happen. It would be great for the fans for them to do it. And there's so much money for them to make. I mean, it's like money on the table for Nintendo. And they love to do this stuff anyway, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I fall on. I don't know how you think, but that's what I think.
I see where your logic is. And I feel like I do agree with you for the most part, especially since, like you said, Dread, they didn't really release the games beforehand. Sure, you could play Super Metroid and Metroid on NES. Why would you want to subject yourself
Switch Online?
Switch Online, right? But they didn't re-release like the entire series like on the Switch. And then it turns out Metroid Dread, like even without all that support, best-selling Metroid game of all time. Like I'm sure they're gonna take some similar notes from that sort of marketing that they did, and I hope that doesn't mean that they'll spoil everything in the Metroid Dread reports. Don't spoil Kraid again like you did in the trailer. Yeah. But I also think like that's probably why there's credence to the rumor that it's just Metroid Prime they're re-releasing. Because maybe they don't think it's too necessary to release the trilogy, especially if Prime 4 might theoretically be like a reboot-quel, if you will. Like, maybe, like...
Okay.
Yeah, like
a reboot-quel?
Yes. Like, it's a sequel, but it's like God of War 2018. Did you really need to know too much about the original trilogy to get into 2018? You really didn't. Maybe that's what they're doing here. Maybe. But you know, if they want to familiarize people with the 3D aspect of Metroid, like, hey, Dread was 2D. You love that, right? Well, here's what people loved from 2002. So maybe that's kind of like their little bit of a taste of what's to come with Prime 4 if they're only re-releasing Prime 1.
It's such an interesting and fun, I think, topic for Metroid fans because, again, as much as I go back to my kind of philosophy that it's not mandatory to make Metroid Prime 4 a success, there is no doubt that it would still help, which aids into like all of the reasons why more than likely they probably will. I mean, I even still tend to think that they're going to, you know, because of the video I just put out. I don't necessarily I wasn't trying to make a prediction that they won't do it. I just think it's an interesting thing to think about because between Prime 4 and Prime Trilogy, it's literally been since 2017 for both of those things that we've been thinking and hearing and expecting to see those two games, and they keep not happening. You know, we found out with Metroid Prime 4, like, hey, we scrapped it, we're going to reboot it with Retro Studios, so, you know, so sorry, you're going to see it in the future. Prime Trilogy was never confirmed, but boy, there's a lot of smoke to that fire. And like you and I were just saying, it's so obvious in terms of business. Like, they'd make so much money. Everyone would buy it, whether they do Prime 1 or the trilogy, and if they released them individually for like $20 digitally, you know, they could do all sorts of things and just make a lot of money. And so it just becomes really interesting to think about it. And so, yeah, I don't think that you're going to have to need to play those games before Prime 4, but it definitely would always help. You would understand the space pirates and them using Phazon to create Metroid Prime and where Dark Samus came from, if Dark Samus is a part of Metroid Prime 4, which she probably shouldn't be, but the writers can do anything they want once pen goes to paper if they want to, you know. Exactly. We've seen crazier things. Yeah, we've seen crazier people come back in our fiction before, so Dark Samus
somehow Dark Samus returned.
It's all dark science and Sith magic.
Beautiful. Yeah. Crossover confirmed. Yeah. Let's do it.
I mean, and I do want to say, last point, going back to what you and I were saying about the Metroid Dread thing, you know, it's safe to assume that I'd say at bare minimum, 1 million of the 3 million maybe were new players to Metroid Dread. And if that's true, all of those people, the new players, didn't play Metroid Fusion because Nintendo didn't release Metroid Fusion or Other M, Joey's favorite game, which are both technically prequels to Metroid Dread.
Yes.
They didn't release Fusion or Other M on the Switch. So everyone jumped in, having never played Metroid Fusion, and loved it. So.
And now that we know Metroid Other M is officially canon, like, why wouldn't you do that?
Exactly. So I'm ready. I'll buy it. I'll buy it, Nintendo. I will be the one guy. I'll buy it 100,000 times.
Don't change the controls one bit. Just play the Joy-Con sideways. Like,
actually, just make them worse. Just make the controls worse.
Do it, please. I dare you.
Yeah, I say as a fan, again, for the viewers here, I've got a poster. I do like that game.
All right, but let's talk about the big thing also that everyone assumes is a real thing. Because, you know, we all assumed it with Zelda Wii U that it was going to be an NX launch title. I'm talking like it's 2016 again. What's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like we're assuming that since the Switch is assumingly not really near the end of its life cycle. Because I know people love to say Nintendo said it would last 10 years. And I'm like, okay, but the PS4 is about to last 10 years. The PS5 still got released. So we're assuming now that Nintendo's on the cusp of perhaps releasing new hardware in the next year or two. And we assume with that in mind, maybe they're also holding off Prime 4 to make it like a dual launch for the Switch and the next-gen console. Or, and I don't think this is extremely likely, maybe even just releasing on the next-gen console altogether. But we'll explain why that's probably not a good idea in a second. Rob, where do you stand on this? Do you think that this game is going to only launch on the Switch? Or do you really think that it's going to be a cross-gen type?
I personally fall very heavily on cross-gen because I just think it makes sense because the Switch's install base is so huge. I feel like the Metroid franchise, as much as it's riding a high from Dread and it's got its best-selling game and people are interested in Metroid more now than ever before, I still think, we know that the franchise can use that help, that boost whenever it can. It's not a Zelda or a Smash Brothers or an Animal Crossing kind of series. If Metroid Prime 4 sells, 4 to 5 million, it's going to be a really big hit. So I feel like, 115 million Switches out there, you just don't ignore that install base.
Right.
But when it comes to the next-gen thing, I think that if Prime 4, if there's a next-gen version, and because Retro is just such a great developer and the graphics and the visuals to the Prime series is so impressive, even the first game is still impressive today, 20 years later, right? So imagine if they really make a next-gen version that could take really good advantage of that power. It's not the biggest franchise to be a killer app for a new console, but in terms of like its tech and how it could showcase the power, it's a cool, sleek, sci-fi, first-person shooter game with this kick-ass warrior girl. Samus, I say warrior girl, but like that's who the character is to newcomers.
Yes. That's
a great way to, I think, hype up your new hardware. And Metroid fans are also going to be like, well, if I'm going to get any version, I want that next-gen version. Mm-hmm. So I think you just cross so many markets when you get the Switch and the next-gen all together. And does the Switch hold back the capabilities of the next-gen version because the tech is outdated? We don't know. We're just theorizing. It's interesting to think about. Would they release on the same day, or would they have to release maybe months apart or a year apart potentially? We don't know those things, but I think that any of the three options is on the table, but I just personally believe that the timeline is going to match up so closely that Prime 4 and the new Switch, or new hardware, will release close enough that I just think cross-gen makes sense for that reason. So
yeah. Totally. I'm kind of with you there too. I hear like different sides of the argument from different people, where it's like on one hand, why would you have a Metroid game be a launch title for a new system? Because like it doesn't make the numbers that Zelda does, and Zelda's historically been like a very successful in the cross-gen sort of situation with the Twilight Princess, with Breath of the Wild. But on the other hand, you might think, like you said, like, hey, what better way to get excited for a new Nintendo console than with a game that really shows like just what kind of visuals this console can put out. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I kind of, because I'm selfish and I want the game sooner, I'm totally okay if it was only if it was first released on the Switch, and maybe if that next console, Switch 2, whatever it's going to be, was backwards compatible and does that cool thing consoles do nowadays, where they make the last gen games look prettier, I'd be okay with that. It gives me another reason to play through the game again. Not like I need another reason. It's Metroid. I'm gonna love it.
I was gonna ask, do you think, could you see Nintendo doing that? Or maybe like if we can put Switch cartridges into the next gen thing, and if we have a Metroid Prime 4 Switch cartridge, will Nintendo release like a next-gen patch like Sony did with God of War? Or would they maybe charge like the director's cut for Ghost of Tsushima and Death Stranding, like $30? You get some new content, and we're going to make the visuals look a little bit more next-gen. Do you think Nintendo would do that, or would they just not and say you just have to buy a whole new $60 version just for this console?
Oh man, if they did that would be a PR nightmare. But at the same time,
like, you and I would buy it.
We would buy it, right? But it'd still be a PR nightmare. I mean, look at the reaction to The Last of Us Part 1. Like, just so many people
true.
just being like, I could play this game. It's already on PS4, like the remaster. Like, why would I do that? We'd like to think Nintendo has common sense, which they do sometimes, but oftentimes they don't.
Not all the time.
Not all the time.
No,
not all the time.
not
Just
all the
look
time.
at Nintendo Switch Online and the way they handle voice chat. It's just...
I mean, we should have the Prime trilogy already if it's been real, right? So I would say that's another example. Like, what are you doing? You know?
Exactly. It's nerve-wracking. With Nintendo, you never know. You never know with Nintendo.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff, but I really hope
so what would you think about if it was next gen only?
I'd be happy for myself, maybe, because it's like, oh, cool,
Yeah.
I can pick up a new game on a new console. Really cool. That's just not good for the franchise, though, because like you said, you don't ignore that Switch user base of 115 million users, probably more by now. And especially since they're the reason the Dread is the best-selling Metroid game of all time. You can't ignore that user base. And I know Samus Returns came out on the 3DS, which was like one of Nintendo's best-selling handhelds, but it came out at the worst possible time. I've heard people who've owned 3DSs say like they don't want to pick up Samus Returns because it's not on the Switch.
The Switch was so new at the time. It was like literally, I think it was September 2017 that game came out.
Yes.
So the Switch had been out for literally 6 months at the time. And so you're right. Samus Returns basically got the Skyward Sword treatment, where it released on an extremely popular high-selling device that was already on its last leg, and interest had completely waned by the time that big game and a storied franchise released. Both Skyward Sword and Samus Returns kind of got the short end of the stick there. But they re-released Skyward Sword on the Switch, so now it's Samus Returns this time. Yeah.
Yeah.
God bless it. Yeah, it was really worth it. So yeah, just pointing that out.
Of course. Yeah. We're Skyward Sword enjoyers in this chat. Like, we love that game so much.
Yes, we do.
But yeah, so we're pretty much thinking this might be the year we'll still Prime 4. I just hope that we get re-releases of at least one of those games. Something to watch. They'll just re-release Prime 3 and call it a day. Like, just the rumors were wrong.
Just a random game. Yeah, they just like closed their eyes and picked a name out of a hat. Like, Metroid Prime Hunters. That's the one game you get.
Can you imagine? Yeah.
Metroid Pinball. We got to get that pinball.
And before we close out the discussion, actually, that's one thing we should talk about. Release dates. Because I don't want to get my hopes up, but I wanted to hope, like, maybe at the very least, like, if it's not doing the cross-gen thing, it comes out holiday 2023, which is very ambitious, maybe. But, Nintendo could surprise us at E3 and say, like, oh, yeah, here's Prime 4, it's coming out in a few months. But I think the safer bet is 2024, because I also think about another game that was announced, like, way too early, Bayonetta 3, which was announced at the Game Awards 2017. We didn't see that game for 4 years. I think it was 4 years. And then
it was 4 years.
And then we finally got a trailer, and then it came out almost exactly a year later after that trailer. So they're probably thinking, what I feel like Nintendo's probably thinking is that, okay, people already know Prime 4 exists. We can't do a Dread thing where it's just like, oh, surprise, here it is, and it's out in 4 months. It's different when they announce a game too early, which is definitely what they did for Prime 4, so... I don't know, Rob. What are your thoughts on all this? Am I just rambling on? Am I a crazy person?
No. I mean, yes, for sure, but also no. Well, I will say I find it interesting that. So you said you don't think that they would reveal it and then release it just a few months later. I kind of feel the opposite. I think like, and either one of us could be right, but I kind of lean more towards thinking that if they were to reveal it like in a September Direct or whatever, let's just say this year. I think it's not crazy that they repeat the Metroid Dread formula and that they only want to reveal that game just because of the chaotic nonsense of the whole development cycle like we've talked about. They want to know that that game is just ready to go. It's going to be gold like tomorrow. So let's reveal it today. So I would like to think they could do like a September reveal and then it releases in like March or something the next year, March or April or just sometime like that. So that's kind of what I would hope for a release date. Is that they do the Dread thing, and it's 5-6 months between the re-reveal and the official like gameplay reveal, and the story reveal, and what if Silux is involved or any of that stuff, and then just a few months later tell us that it's going to be ready to go. And if we follow this exact date format that I'm using for this example, I don't think it's crazy that in March next year that's also when the next console could launch. So what if? And I actually made a video about this recently too. Like, I feel like when they know that Metroid Prime 4 is about six-ish months away, if I can speak, if it's about 6 or so months away, and if the next gen is a real plan for that game, if they can combine the reveal of Metroid Prime 4 gameplay with some kind of information or confirmation about new hardware, they could do both of those things at the end of this year and then release them on the same day. We are really dreaming as Metroid fans, by the way, but they could release them on the same day in the first half of 2024, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we would see all that stuff before this year is over, and then play it in the first half before summer next year. Metroid Prime 4 on a new console, maybe. So.
Yeah, man.
It's a lofty goal. I know I'm shooting for the stars when I say that, but it's an option on the table, and I don't think it's totally impossible, you know?
You know, we don't know much about Nintendo's year yet. We really only know about Zelda, Pikmin 4, that Bayonetta spin-off game, Kirby next month. I feel like anything's on the table at this point. Like, it's... Man, I'm really looking forward to when, at least maybe the first Nintendo Direct, which might be next month, is as history foretold. Like... There's always a Nintendo Direct in February, almost always. Or maybe even after Tears of the Kingdom, that's when we really start to see, like, maybe not just next-gen console hype, but maybe Metroid Prime 4 hype? Like what else are they going to get us excited
for
after Tears of the Kingdom?
Yeah.
Or the trilogy?
Yeah.
If anything, I could bet, like, maybe we'll see the trilogy or the Metroid Prime 1 remaster in the first Direct of the year. Hopefully. But I also know but I also know Nintendo doesn't want to, like they could possibly, like, distract from Zelda because it's Zelda, right? But I know they tend to focus on their bigger releases a lot more than they do their smaller-ish ones. Prime is a big deal for us, right? But it doesn't sell as much as Zelda, so.
Yeah. I think they're going to try to make it, though, a big deal. I think they're going to put all their marketing behind Prime 4 whenever we see it. And even more so if there's any truth to the next-gen thing, which could be wrong. But if there is truth to it, their marketing is going to go just bananas on that. And I want to give a little bit of shout out to our fallen comrade Super Metal Dave, who you said something similar earlier, but he's long said that he thinks Metroid Prime Trilogy and Prime 4 could almost be revealed at like the same time, right? Yeah. Where like the big trailer is for the Prime Trilogy, and then at the end they're like, here's 30 seconds to tease Prime 4, you're going to see it next year kind of thing. And I do think that's also one of the many options on the table. So I would just have to think, and obviously we're running out of time, we don't want to turn this into an E3 discussion, but it kind of makes me realize the more we think about it with Zelda coming, I don't think Nintendo would possibly skip E3 the month after, right? Because it'd be June.
Yes.
So yeah, May would be Zelda, June would be E3. A month later, then they're like, all right, we got Zelda out of the way, it's sold 15 million copies already, now it's time to talk Prime Trilogy, Prime 4, new Mario game, new console, blah, 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 and they just go ham, you know? I mean, because you make a great point. Other than Pikmin, we know nothing else for, like, later in the year. Because even Kirby, I think, is like in March or something.
It's in February. It's next month already.
February. Okay, so then it's just Zelda and Pikmin. So, I'm just saying.
Very exciting stuff, man. I think you know, as much as it makes sense to say it out loud, and it's not a big deal to say it out loud, but every year we're that much closer to Prime 4. You know, in 5 seconds we'll be that much closer to Metroid Prime 4. I'm ready. I'm so ready. Show us something, please. This year. But thank you so much, Rob. Tell us where we can find you on the YouTubes.
Yes, you can find me on YouTube at Rule of Two Review, and you can also find me on Twitter at Rule of Two Review.
Very nice.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Links are in the description for all of Rob's channels. Thank you all so much for watching this discussion, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.